Speaking of our budgetary woes, now Utah Senator Mike Lee is proposing a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. Like it's not enough for our lawmakers to realize the dire circumstances we're in. We need an actual amendment to the Constitution to force them to only spend the money we send to Washington and no more. Here's what Senator Lee told me earlier.
We need to do this because we need permanent structural spending reform so that we don't find ourselves back in the same position every 6 to 18 months and having to raise the debt limit.
I love it. Why not get our house in order? Let's bring in today's Money Power panel. James Freeman is assistant editor of the Wall Street Journal. Gretchen Hamel is executive director of Public Notice. And Dennis Kelleher is the CEO and president of Better Markets. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Gretchen, let me start with you. What do you think about this? Would this help a lot? Yeah, go ahead.
It's a noble idea, and it's something that we should strive for. But there are some things that we need to take care of first, and that's we need to actually look at having a budget. It's been 1,300 days since we've had a budget. We need to actually find ways to cut spending and to get our fiscal house in order. And a balanced budget amendment would be a great idea, but if we put something in place right now, they would be forced to raise taxes instead of actually cutting spending. And so I think we need to take care of cutting spending before we go about doing this constitutional amendment.
I think under the particular Lee plan, they really wouldn't have to raise taxes, because I think the best part of his plan is he limits spending and taxes to 18% of GDP. And that's really the big debate in America right now is are we going to go with Barack Obama's plan of 25% or more of GDP consumed by government, or is it going to go back to a more reasonable historical 18 that Mr. Lee is proposing?
No, that is an interesting point. I mean, Dennis, what do you think about that? What if we automatically had to limit spending to 18% of GDP? Currently, it's 23%. It's like $1 trillion that they'd have to shave off right away.
Well, I don't think we need more gimmicks. We need guts. We don't need politicians having these things which they claim are meaningful, which are not. If you were to have the budget at 18% of GDP, you'd be cutting over $1 trillion a year out of the budget for 10 years. So instead of filing a little bill that says somebody else should automatically do this, put out a budget. If you're a senator, put out a budget that actually cuts $1 trillion from this year's budget. You can cut it from where? Defense, discretionary, Medicare, Social Security. Step up, lay out your actual cuts. The problem we have isn't that we don't have enough gimmicks like the budget amendment. We got plenty of gimmicks. We don't have guts. So you're going to cut Medicare by that amount, or are you going to cut Social Security? Is it defense?
Yeah.
Tell us where you're going to cut.
I don't know, but this is making me as hopeless as ever, because, Gretchen, no one has any guts in Washington. So if we need, I mean, we can't rely on gimmicks, and we got to rely on guts. You know, we're screwed.
We do, and I mean that's where this balanced budget amendment comes in, and you have to wonder, can we even get this done? Because if they can't even cut spending, if they can't even take on defense cuts, if they can't even take on Social Security or Medicare and prioritize what we need to do in this nation, do you really think they're going to have the guts to have a constitutional amendment and agree on that? I mean, you have to wonder that. I mean, it's a great idea. I think it's a worthy one, but looking realistically, I don't know if it'll happen.
What should we do? Because, James, we haven't even solved the sequestration problem. I mean, I don't know if people realize that. Well, I mean, on March 1st, we still have the automatic cutoff in place. We haven't done anything. You like that? Okay.
Yeah. This is a start toward fiscal sanity.
I like you more and more every day, James. I got to tell you that.
Take the cuts wherever we can get them. I mean, this isn't maybe the package you would design, but, you know, amazing news flash that Washington is going to restrain some spending. So
yeah, Dennis, what do you think? Because I'm about to ask James to co-anchor this show with me in the future. What do you think?
Well, I think the problem is talking about cutting spending in theory, everybody agrees on, but let's focus on real things. I mean, this spending gets cut on money gets spent on very important things. Social Security. The average recipient of Social Security, their average income per year is less than $20,000.
Wait, but I'm going to stop you right there, because this is where we get bogged down every time, because we try and talk about what's fair, where can you cut and where can't you, and then everybody has a dog in the fight. I mean, it almost makes more sense to go on a percentage basis to everything. Fair is fair across the board, except, and you're going to put your except in, and then James is going to put his, well, no, he probably won't, but Gretchen might put an except.
If people will, Melissa, if people will really do that and spell it out, what it would mean to do across-the-board cuts, that's fine if they would spell it out and agree to do it. But remember, this spending is done on some very important things that people want to spend money on. They don't want to pay for it, but they want to receive it.
I don't know. I don't want to receive anything. James, what do you think?
I think you got to give some credit to Republicans like Paul Ryan, like Mike Lee, who have spelled out some cuts that have been attacked by the White House. Every time they've come out with reforms, Medicare Medicare, you know, one of those big untouchable things you say no one wants to touch. They've talked about reforming it. The problem is there's no appetite in the White House to reform any of this.
Gretchen, go ahead.
But it's not just the White House, too. I mean, you have the Senate here that has to act. And you also, let's not forget, the House can talk a big game and Paul Ryan can talk a big game, but they have to have a majority. And we haven't always seen a majority come through on deals like this.
No, and that's a great point. And I'll ask each of you before we go, do you think anyone really wants to cut spending? I mean, we're talking about Democrats, Republicans. I'm not sure anyone really wants to tackle the problem. Go ahead, Gretchen.
It's a tough job ahead. They have no choice. It's the issue of our time.
Dennis, go ahead.
Look, I think we need to get spending and revenue in balance. You can't just do this all by spending cuts. You've got to have revenue increases. These are anti-poverty programs that people in the United States want.
James, go ahead. Last word.
Mike Lee, criticize him, but he wants to cut it. So does Ron Johnson, Tom Coburn. So it's not hopeless. You've got some votes for spending cuts.
Okay. Guys, thanks so much. Terrific power panel. Appreciate all your insight. Good.